Violet Chachki.
Looking smart and tartan.
Getting a reveal.
Oh, God.
Oh! Bay City Roller.
I'm giving you touch and eleganza.
Get her, Jade.
Girl, you had rolls all over the place in the back. It was disgusting.
Back rolls. This little queen is trying to really come for me today. Enough.
Is it, RuPaul, is it an art form?
I think it's an art form. I dropped out of society when Reagan got in office. And I've been underground ever since. In fact, I think it's important that you love yourself. I think everybody say love. Everybody say love. All at home, touch your TV set, because this is the most important show you'll ever watch.
What was just shown is a part of drag culture, but is not all of drag culture. So, how did drag culture actually begin? Drag is a theatrical term used to describe a man or a woman dressing in clothes typically worn by the opposite sex. A person putting on drag occurs whenever someone puts on clothes that are considered inappropriate for them, also known as cross-dressing. In theater, this contributes to a sense of theatrical irony. The term drag comes from the action of long dresses dragging across the theater stage.
Drag, both historically and currently, is a little controversial. However, drag is nothing new. In fact, drag has probably been around as long as humans have been wearing clothes. Some of the earliest forms of cross-dressing were seen in ancient religious ceremonies all around the world. Ancient ceremonies in Native American, ancient Egyptian, Japanese, and indigenous South American cultures were often performed in drag. These rituals were usually fertility rituals, invocations of the gods, or to ward off evil spirits.
Drag, however, was predominantly seen in theater. Before women were allowed to perform in theater, men had to play female roles, which meant that they also had to dress in women's clothing. This was commonly seen in ancient Greece, where women were banned from participating in theater, even though theater played a huge role in Greek society. Masked male actors would play some of the most well-known female characters from Greek theater, like Hecuba and Cleomenstra. Across the world in Japan, similar things were happening, except in kabuki theater. Kabuki theater is classical Japanese theater drama where male actors would dress in drag, which included a full face of makeup, wigs, and female clothing, and followed stylized dance routines, and even speak with a higher pitch. These male actors would perform folk dances associated with rice planting and fertility, and would explore their feminine side through symbolic dance.
In England, William Shakespeare required his actors to dress in drag to play women in his theater. Formal drama came, literally, out of the church. It was created in an effort to help the illiterate learn the stories of the Bible, and drag was incorporated into the church services by men, acting out scenes involving women from the Bible. Because of the rise of controversy and, well, misogyny, drama was eventually removed from the church altogether. When Western theater transitioned from its religious roots to something much less sacred, the rules excluding women were kept intact. However, it is also important to note that during this time, drag was not associated yet with homosexuality. It wasn't until much, much later that homosexuality and drag were linked together by society.
Nowadays, whenever somebody hears the term drag, they automatically associate it with drag queens, and not just as a theatrical term. However, cross-dressing remained a pervasive part of theater culture until the late 19th century, when things started to take a turn, at least in the United States. At this time, a new phenomenon called female impersonators began to arise. These female impersonators were men dressed in drag who developed their own vaudeville acts. Vaudeville is a type of theater that became very popular chiefly in the U.S. during the 20th century, and it featured a mix of all different performances ranging from burlesque to comedy. Female impersonators found a home in these theaters and began to do solo comedy performances in full drag until about the 1930s. It was in these comedy shows that terms like prima donna and wench were coined.
In order to find the first iterations of the first drag queens in America, we need to find the time when drag became linked with the gay community. This link did not really form until the 1930s, when the field of sexology was first starting to be discussed. It was in these discussions that scientists began to talk about the so-called third sex, which was described as an overly feminine man or a masculine woman who both desired members of the same sex. This scientific conversation leaked its way into popular culture, and suddenly people began to link this idea of the third sex with drag. Prior to this, drag culture belonged to the straight white men performing in theater, but now it belonged to the gay community. It was during this time that we witnessed the first emergence of true drag queens. One famous example of this is Julian Eltidge, who in 1920 received rave reviews about her performance in the play The Fascinating Widow.
Drag queens are typically defined as men who dress in women's clothes and perform acts for an audience. Drag queens first only began to perform for private parties until the emergence of gay bars. These bars really took off in the 1950s in boroughs of big cities like San Francisco or New York. At first, drag queens were actually not fond of performing in bars because it was viewed as unprofessional since they wanted to be respected as theatrical artists. However, drag queens soon found that the only places they were welcome to perform were in gay bars and at a risk. Police raids were especially common since homosexuality was illegal and that drag performances were considered an art form born in the queer world. This changed when Prohibition rolled around, and men found plenty of underground places popping up out of the sight of the law where they could drink alcohol and be openly homosexual. For their enjoyment, they would often view drag performances.
The rise of these plentiful underground gay bars was called the pansy craze. This lasted during the 1950s through the 1960s until law enforcement started cracking down on these undercover bars. Then, something called drag balls began and were mini societies hosted by drag queens. This is also called ball culture, or the house system, and was an underground LGBT subculture in the United States. In these events, drag queens would walk across the stage for trophies and prizes at events called drag balls. At these events, different drag queens could join together to form drag houses, which would consist of a group of drag queens bound together for moral support and shelter in the event that they were thrown out of their own homes. By 1966, there were an estimated 500 working drag queens in America.
A few years later, in 1972, indie filmmaker John Waters made his drag queen friend Divine the star of his new movie Pink Flamingos. After the film was released, Divine became a counterculture icon. Another 70s film that introduced drag culture into the mainstream was the cult classic feature film The Rocky Horror Picture Show, which starred Tim Curry as Dr. Frankenfurter. The importance of these films is that they introduced drag culture into the media versus only in theater.
In the 1980s, with the rise of pop music, some stars dressed up in full or semi-drag when performing on stage like Philip Oakey, Boy George, and Pete Burns. In 1985, the New York City festival known as Wigstock was founded by popular drag star Lady Bunny, who was known for her large and in-charge blonde wigs. In 1988, Divine played the iconic role of Edna Turnblad in the John Waters film Hairspray. Even to this day, it is a tradition that a man in drag also plays this role. These were all major contributors to drag starting to seep into the mainstream culture in the United States.
The heart of drag culture in the mid to late 1980s was drag balls. In 1990, Jenny Livingston released the critically acclaimed documentary Paris is Burning, which focused on drag ball culture in Harlem, New York's predominantly black community. The 1990s gave rise to many legendary and well-known drag queens, the most famous one being RuPaul, who is credited for bringing drag culture into the mainstream. His reign began in the mid-1990s with his hit song Supermodel, which was released in 1994. In 1996, RuPaul had his own talk show titled The RuPaul Show, which ran for 100 episodes. RuPaul paved the way for drag queens and popular culture for the 2000s and beyond. In 2009, the first season of RuPaul's Drag Race was aired on TV. RuPaul's Drag Race features 12 up-and-coming drag queens who compete in a competition to become America's next drag superstar and to win a cash prize of $100,000. This show gives a national platform for drag queens in America. We are currently living in the RuPaul era of drag, not only in the United States, but also globally. Now drag culture is more popular than ever and appeals to a very diverse group of people.
I always had hopes of being a big star. And then I look, as you get older, you aim a little lower. And I just say, well, yeah, you still might make an impression. Everybody wants to leave something behind them, some impression, some mark upon the world. And then you think you left a mark on the world if you just get through it. And a few people remember your name, then you left a mark. You don't have to bend the whole world. I think it's better to just enjoy it.